Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this presentation about domain name monitoring as part of security strategy. My name is Michiel Henneke. I'm with SIDN, the company behind the .nl domain. And I'm going to take you through the world of domain name abuse in the next 30 minutes. So just to start out here, who of you in this room is familiar with SIDN? Could you raise your hands? Oh, great, that's the vast majority, because usually only a minority knows who we are. And that's a great intro for me at birthday parties. Like, nobody knows who we are, but everybody is a customer with us. We are the company behind .nl, and with 6.2 million domain names, there are 11 million domains in the Netherlands registered in total. We are one of the biggest country code domains in the world. Only the UK, Germany, and China are significantly bigger than .nl. We are, and this is important to stress because not many people know this, we're not government. We're a private foundation, and we were founded and based in Arnhem since 1996. The reason most people never deal with us is because we do not sell directly to the public, but we sell through 1,100 internet providers, hosters, and web designers, a group which we refer to as registrars. And our main task happens in the background on the top right, is we make sure that when somebody types in a .nl domain name or emails to a .nl mail address, the mail gets delivered, or that the person actually visits the correct website. We do that 2.5 billion times a day. So what do we do in cybersecurity? Well, three things. First of all, and I'm going to talk about that later, is we protect brands and companies from infringement by checking for typo domains or infringing registrations. We check for big companies what the size of their domain name portfolio is. That sounds a bit odd, but many organizations don't know how many domain names and websites they actually have. And we have .nl control, which is an extra layer of security that you can add to a specific domain to prevent unwanted or unauthorized mutations. When we talk about domain name abuse, what do we mean? Well, it's a pretty broad concept, and it is not one specific form of cybercrime we're talking about, but we're talking about the use of domains to facilitate a pretty large number of fraudulent activities. Phishing, malvertising, BEC fraud, fake web shops, fake invoices, email interception, a lot is possible. And the reason domain names are so attractive for these practices is that, well, the semantic similarities between a typo domain and the domain of a legit organization give a phishing attempt, for example, credibility. But less well known is that cybercriminals are also interested in an existing Google ranking for a domain name. I'll show you an example for that later on. Also, it can be handy to have a domain name which has previously been used for email, because existing spam filters will not detect it as spam. After all, it has been used legitimately. Now, there have been some pretty high-profile cases in the recent past where domain names were used, and the one on the left is still the record holder, unfortunately, in the Netherlands. About 7 years ago, using a variety of techniques, including fake domain names, a number of cybercriminals managed to defraud the Pathé cinema chain for 19 million euros. By stealing the identity of an executive and coercing other executives into wiring 19 million euros for a so-called takeover in the Middle East, which of course was a total figment of the criminal's imagination. These cases make the news, but unfortunately they're also why a lot of companies don't think about domain name monitoring themselves, because they think, well, this is not happening to me. This is, we are too small to be a target. This happens to big companies and banks. Yeah, I've seen this domain name registration, but it does not seem to be in use. And that's correct, because usually when a cyber criminal wants to send spam email or phishing emails, he's not going to advertise it by add a visible and detectable website. Also, that there's no damage to the company itself. A lot of phishing, the damage is not to the company itself directly, but to people thinking they are buying from that company. It's only in the long term, in terms of reputation damage, that companies suffer from domain name abuse. So we often have a hard time convincing organizations that this is something they should be aware of and act upon. Now, let me get you into the two forms of domain name abuse and start with typo squatting. And let me show you some examples that show the creativity of cyber criminals. This is from a few years back, and just to put your mind at ease, most email clients have been adapted since. People received this mail from supposedly Apple, which looked totally legit. However, what cybercriminals discovered is that by entering, in this case, Cyrillic letters, browsers would transpose those Cyrillic letters to a Western word for Western users, thereby translating a Russian term into Apple and thereby, well, making it seem as if it was really Apple sending this particular email. As I said, this particular trick no longer works, but it does still stand out for its creativity. And it doesn't necessarily need to be mail. Smishing using SMS is on the rise because somehow people think SMS is more reliable than email. Now this is an interesting case because this is DigID and they use contact digid.me. Now who of you knows where the .me domain belongs? Anybody? Yeah? Yeah, it's a national domain of Montenegro. And very few people know that, but this is what we call creative use of an exotic domain. One of the things that I seriously dislike is that Tiki, the payment service, uses .me for its official domain, thereby hosting one of the country's most important payment services in Montenegro outside of the European Union, but that's their decision. Yeah, this is .me is Montenegro. Not there's anything wrong with Montenegro, but it's definitely not in the Netherlands, and it's not somewhere where you would find DigID, which is Dutch government hosted. Now, in the last few years, we and our peers have become a lot better at detecting fraudulent phishing websites, and criminals have responded accordingly. And if you're into cybersecurity, this is one advice I'd like to give to you. Recently, they've been switching to mobile-only phishing. This is a Netflix example, because they found out that a lot of support desks at companies and cybersecurity consultancy firms only check domains in a desktop or laptop site format. In other words, if somebody would log in to the desktop site, they'd be redirected to the official homepage of Netflix, and they'd say, well, there's nothing wrong here, it's just a redirect. However, if a user using a mobile device would do the same, he'd be redirected to the phishing site. So my tip, two things here. First of all, do check the mobile version. Second, when you notice a new URL redirecting traffic to your official homepage or that of one of your clients, don't assume it's harmless. It can be a way to disguise that the mail address is used to send spam or for phishing or social engineering purposes. How can you prevent that? Well, there's a number of ways, and our booth will be able to provide you with a demo. But because we do the central administration of .nl and have access to the administration of most of our peers, for example, .com, we can basically check if somebody tries to register a typo on an existing domain before the website or mail server attached to it goes live. In other words, basically allowing you to intervene before any damage is done. And I'll get to the how to intervene later on. But before I do that, there is one thing I need to address here. WooView is familiar with modern open mail standards, such as DMARC. Okay, glad to hear that's almost 50% here. For those of you who aren't, unfortunately, there is a technique to fake the sender of an email in such a way that it is almost indistinguishable from a true email unless the company involved or your company has implemented a number of standards. And in this case, well, you need to make sure that the mail is validated according to these standards. DMARC, DKIM, SPF, and DANE are the most common ones. BIMI is a new one, the latter one allowing you to actually add your corporate logo to official sent emails. This is something I could talk for hours about, but I don't have. However, it is a standard I'm always promoting when I present, so if you want to know more about this or want to know how your website performs, please check this QR code. It is safe, trust me. Okay, that's a bad thing to say at a cybersecurity conference, but really, trust me, you're between me and the exit. This website, internet.nl, you have the possibility to check whether or not a website or mail server uses the open standards for security in a sufficient way. And if you do this with some prominent URLs or websites, you'd be surprised at how poorly some organizations perform. So, one tip for me. Unfortunately, sometimes the abuse does not use any semantic similarities to an organization or brand, and they just use the visuals. And let me get you an example here. Which of these 4 domains do you think has been used to host a fake web shop for Nike sneakers? Nike Air Max for only 60 euros. Which one? Who thinks it's A? Nobody? B? C? And D? Okay, the answer is, it's all 4 of them. And let me get into the latter one, because that one is quite the case. Werkenbijsexion.nl. Most of you will probably be familiar that this is an actual University of Applied Sciences here. But one day they deleted the domain name werkenbijsexion.nl, but left the link on their corporate website intact. And this is a tip in the series, please don't do this yourself. Which meant that it was recently deleted by a bona fide organization, had a history in Google, and a backlink on a trusted corporate website. This is the dream of anybody wanting to start a fraudulent web shop, and that's exactly what happened, even though the name has nothing to do with sneakers or footwear or any kinds of apparel at all. And I'll get back to this because this is part of my tips. Be careful about deleting domain names when you do it. Make sure This kind of thing is absolutely gone. Because cyber criminals really don't care that much about whether the domain makes sense. They just look into, okay, is this something I can hack or use, or does it have a reputation? What we do since about 2 years is that we detect logos and visuals in our zone. We do the entire 6.2 million zone once a month. It's quite a job. But when we have new registrations, we do it every 3 hours for 2 weeks in a row. But maybe after this presentation, I'll change that to 3 weeks, just to make sure. And for example, well, if you look at Amazon, which is something we use for demo purposes, based on similarities, we will find, for example, this particular website, which, as you can see, has nothing to do semantically with Amazon. However, if you look at the logos on the website, you will see that, yes, it does feature the Amazon logo. And in this case, it's actually bona fide, but you could imagine that there are cases where that is not so. And if you are responsible for cybersecurity at Amazon, you may not want your logo to be used there. So what can you do as an organization? Well, there are a number of tips I would like to give it, but the most important one, and I'm always starting, is be consistent and complete in the way you register domains. And by consistent, I mean make sure that you spell your company name in exactly the same way. If you use a contact person, write out his name as complete as possible. We once had a great case where a domain name was registered to Mr. J. Johnson, and there were 3 men by that name attached to the company, and we could not figure out which of the 3 owned the domain name. That one ended up in court. So don't make J. Johnson, but make it Jack Jones Johnson. Make it as complete as possible. Also, be very restrictive in allowing third parties to use your name or logo. I understand it from a commercial point of view. However, when somebody else uses your visuals, it could be that you're not in control, and if that party gets hacked or makes a mistake or negliges to, I don't know, renews its certificate, it could become something which also damages your reputation. Always make sure you have a complete overview of all your domains. That is something which quite a lot of large organizations don't have. It's not uncommon for a big organization to have 2,000 to 3,000 domains and other digital assets in their portfolio. This is something that you have to be very concise about. And the latter one, and I just said it, but I'm going to repeat it here. If you have a domain that you don't use anymore, or for example, it is attached to a name which is changing due to a merger or takeover, your first idea would be, okay, let's get rid of this. But beware. If it still receives mail, chances are it can be used for spam or phishing, and quite often mail addresses using the domain can be used to log in to online applications elsewhere. We had a pretty severe case of this about 8 years ago, when 2 branches of mental health care merged, GGZ, and their old domains were still in use, and a journalist discovered that you could use mail addresses under those domains to access confidential files of children. So beware. I know you're paying for a domain you're not deleting, but the cost of a domain deleted too soon being abused may be a lot higher than the cost of maintaining the domain and preventing somebody else from abusing it. If you want to know more about it, there's information on our website. In addition to policy, I also recommend monitoring. Once again, we can give a demo in our booth. Monitor regularly for similar domain names and logos, and be restrictive. Don't say, well, yeah, this is a similar domain, but it does not seem to be abused. Yeah, that's true, because you can't see whether, for example, it's used for mail from the outside. Usually, the moment you realize it's being abused is the moment somebody uses it to send 1 million spam emails using your or your client's brand. There are several tools. We have one of them for .nl. But monitoring something regularly makes you or your clients a less attractive target. That we know from experience. And then there's the last one, and this is something I could talk about very long, but the most asked question I get when I'm in the booth is, hey, somebody has been hijacking my domain name. What do I do? Now, the law regarding the use of domain names is actually pretty clear and not that difficult. However, the problem is, because it's so specific, many legal professionals are not trained or schooled in it. So, for example, they go to court and neglect the fact that there are alternative dispute resolution possibilities which are cheaper and faster that they can use. And these are the most important ones, .nl.com. And where I say .com, you can also fill in .org, .net, .info, or any domain which consists of more than 2 letters. There is the Uniform Domain Name Dispute Resolution Policy, UDRP. And for us, there is dispute resolution on our website, limited cost and time. That is if there's an IP infringement or a hijacking case. If it's really illegal, what you're seeing, like for example, a fake web shop or spam or DDoS, command and control center for DDoS, we have a pretty efficient notice and takedown procedure which works through the abuse address of the provider involved, and which we think, if you look at recent reports, works pretty well out here in the Netherlands. There are very few providers, not in the Netherlands that I know of, that want to be high on the list of unreliable parties. What else can I say about this? Well, yeah, one other tip that I have: when you encounter somebody hijacking a domain name and you have the ID, okay, this is a cyber criminal, this isn't right. My first tip for you or your legal professional is ask us to verify the identity. Because there's a rule that the data attached to a domain name should be correct. And this rule will be enforced more strictly when the NIS2 guideline. Okay, incidentally, who of you have heard of the NIS2 guideline? Yeah, that's the new European cybersecurity guideline coming into effect next year. That the identity of the person or entity registering the domain name should be correct. So often the fastest way of getting rid of somebody hijacking a domain name is to say, hey, I don't think that this person is really who he says he is. I don't think that this is Mr. Donald Duck living in Duckstead. And yes, somebody has actually been registering domains with that name and address with us in the past. We had to laugh about that too. But often that's where it already ends. So that is the end of my presentation, and I think we have 5 minutes for questions. My colleague has the microphone. We're being filmed, so if you have a question, please raise your hand so that he can give the microphone to you. Anybody? Oh, yeah, up here in front.
Lucien Roelofs. Question about infringement. Many times private persons get involved in the infringements. Can they also give that infringement to SIDN?
Okay, sorry. Somehow the microphone doesn't seem to be working very clear. But basically your question is, if you have an infringement, yeah, and can you report it to us? The first step is that you always contact the owner of the domain name or the provider. Every provider in our system needs to have an abuse contact registered for that person. And they have to respond within a certain period of time. I think it's 48 or 72 hours. Forgive me if I don't know the exact number. However, if for some reason you do not get any response, then we are the next step. However, most providers will want to prevent us from overruling them. So in my experience, 99% of cases will be picked up by the provider before we have to take action. But yeah, if you go to our website, you will see, okay, what do I do? What are the steps to follow if there's a malicious domain? Any other questions? Oh, yep, please.
You mentioned this incident where domain name was deleted and
Yep.
then it was misused by this sneaker company, right? Or a sneaker advertising website?
Yeah.
This deprovisioning of old domains, is there a way where we can make this less dangerous in that sense? Maybe wait a week or for a period of time so it's removed from Google,
Yeah.
something like that? And
Okay.
how could we kind of, who's responsible for this? How could we enforce this?
Well, my advice is always that when, okay, the question is there a way to make sure that a domain is really inactive before you delete it? An important one would be your own statistical data. For example, if you use an analytics tool to keep that active on the domain and check if there's any traffic. A second one is to wait long enough for you to ensure that there is no longer any reputation in Google. And I think it is Moz, M-O-Z, where you can check the ranking or reputation of a domain. Once that one hits the point where it's, I think, 10 on a scale of 1 to 100, you can be pretty sure that it's no longer attractive to cyber criminals. So I think that takes, on average, about 6 months to a year. And keeping a domain name in portfolio without an attached website for a year should not cost you more than 20 euros. So it's worth the wait. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Before you leave, if you would like a check on your domain name or one of your clients, you can scan the QR code near the exit, or you can walk to our booth right across, and my colleagues will gladly help you with any checks or problems or questions. Thank you.